So a little while ago I made a video covering a bunch of the fan translations available on the PS1, 48 fan translations to be exact, a small but incredibly diverse selection of games that only just begins to scratch the surface of the cool gaming experiences we were missing out on in the West. Games that let you control giant remote control robots, games where you manage your anger issues quite poorly, robot Pokemon, a fighting frog, and even Chinese checkers. We were truly missing out. But thanks to some lovely hardworking members of the gaming community, these experiences are now more accessible than ever, and luckily for us, the hits just keep coming, with new translation patches dropping almost every other month at this stage. It can be kinda hard to keep up with them all. PS1 fans are truly eating well these days. We're getting more exclusives than the PS5 is at this rate, if you think about it. So, since the translators and hackers have been so busy this year, I figured why not check in and see what dropped since the last video, a sort of catch-up of all the fan translations released throughout the year. It's something that we could probably make a yearly tradition of if this current rate keeps up, because we've got 18 games to look at today, and let me tell you, they are some of the most interesting and unique experiences you will find on the console. Seriously, things get a little bit trippy today. Maybe not quite LSD trippy, but you know, trippy enough to see a giant talking tree man at least. Yeah, video games are weird. So, as always, before we dig into the games, just a quick disclaimer to let you know the 18 games that we'll be looking at today are all English language translations and should be playable on both original hardware or with emulation, assuming you've got the means to do either. Now, some of these games will be from 2021 as they missed the cutoff point of the last video, but the majority did release this year in 2022, some as recently as Christmas Day, showing you why it's a good idea to wait until the end of the year to make a video like this. It meant that I could update the script while immobilized on the couch from eating too many potatoes, something every Irish man suffers from on occasion. Anyway, we'll be looking at our 18 games today in alphabetical order, and what better place to start than with one of the year's biggest releases. Kicking things off, we have Aconcagua, a point-and-click survival game set on the Argentinian mountain of the same name. This patch comes courtesy of Hilltop, a name you might remember from the last video, and also one you should prepare to hear plenty more of as this current video goes on. In Aconcagua, you will take the role of a number of survivors who have been stranded on the mountain after a bomb blew up the plane that you're all traveling in. At first, the survivors think it was an accident, but shortly into the game, your characters begin to learn, maybe it wasn't quite an accident, resulting in your crew needing to work together to not just survive the terrorists trying to kill you, but also the mountain itself. And you do that by pointing and clicking a lot. Now, truthfully, it's a lot more exciting than what it seems. It's actually kind of like a fun point-and-click version of The Lost Vikings, with each individual character having their own skills and items that work in different situations, and the key to success, and not dying on the mountain, is to use all of them individually to solve different puzzles together. It's quite cool actually. Although I'd say the big selling point of this game is the story and production values. Lots of mystery and intrigue right from the get-go with this one, and the game is even voiced in English and Spanish by default. It's clearly a big budget project, and considering it's a late first-party release from Sony themselves, well, it's no wonder this one was high on many people's translation wishlist. So if you're looking for a unique style of survival game on the console, well, maybe give Aconcagua a try, or, you know, don't. Not your dad, like. Next up, we have everybody's favorite cross between Tomb Raider and the TV show Flipper. It's B.L.U.E, Legend of Water, an underwater adventure puzzler from Hudson Soft. God, remember them? Those sure were some good times before Konami ate them up and decided to put out Bomberman games featuring Pyramid Head. Still better than Go-Kart Pyramid Head, I guess. This translation once again comes from the team at Hilltop and is one of the most recent releases on our list, having only made it out in the middle of December this year. And let me tell you, if you like relaxing underwater adventures and cute dolphin portraits, well, then this is the game for you. For the the most part, it's a nice easygoing adventure that sees you take the role of a diver named Maya, whose father is captaining a research facility tasked with exploring and unearthing some underwater ruins. And while it is fun and, I don't know, important to the story to navigate around the facility and befriend everyone on board, the meat of this game is heading out on underwater expeditions and getting up to all sorts of mischief, like gassing sharks or activating ancient underwater ruins. You've also got a dolphin friend named Luca who isn't just really cute, but is competent in taking AI orders as well, allowing you to solve puzzles and even scare away bigger fish blocking your path. It doesn't work on sharks though, and I learned that the hard way. B.L.U.E has got a lot going for it here. Good underwater movement, interesting puzzles, lovely oceanic audio and visuals, and a story that goes to some pretty wacky places. Sure, it's a nice game about a girl and her pet dolphin, but you know, it's not afraid to get spooky sometimes too. Honestly, going into this game knowing very little about it, I was surprised at how quickly I got hooked on it. It managed to strike this lovely balance between relaxing and challenging to make for a perfect game to unwind with over a single afternoon. Plus, I really can't stress enough how cute these dolphin portraits are. How could you not play this? Going from a lovely game to a not so lovely game, next up we have Baroque, a first-person dungeon crawler with roguelike elements and a port of the 1998 Sega Saturn original. Baroque is a game that I've always had my eye on ever since I first discovered it. I, like many, likely got my first taste of Baroque thanks to the PS2 and Wii remake that did see a release in the West, albeit now featuring third-person dungeon crawling instead of first-person. Now, I've never had a chance to play this remake, but it's the kind of game that you always remember thanks to how strange and unfriendly the whole thing seemed to be. Needless to say, critics at the time, they didn't really get it. Well, fast forward, I don't know, 15 years, and the PS1 version of the original is now available to play in English in all its strange glory. Baroque is obtuse in its nature. The story is told through cutscenes and flashes of dialogue from NPCs, but only in pieces at a time. To learn more, you'll need to make it through this game's dungeon known as the Nerve Tower, kill a specific target, die, and then come back to life and do it all over again. Each time, you get more and more information revealed to you, but the Nerve Tower also gets more deadly too. If there's one word I'd use to describe Baroque, is that it's foreboding. The game just has this incredibly oppressive atmosphere where you feel like everything is out to get you, from the environments, the enemies, and even the NPCs. This is a grim world with grim characters and grim locales to match, but for me, it's the sound design that really sells the whole thing to me. We're talking Silent Hill levels of unease here, people. This game isn't messing about. Baroque is a tough game that will not hold your hand, and you will quite literally need to use every last item at your disposal to make it through these dungeons alive, but it's an intense and engaging experience with tons of replayability due to the breadth of options available to you. So, needless to say, if you like first-person dungeon crawlers, roguelikes, or being instilled with a powerful sense of dread, well then Baroque is the game for you. For those looking for a potent hit of 90s nostalgia, next up we've got Beavis and Butt-Head in Virtual Stupidity, a point-and-click adventure game starring everybody's favorite dumbasses. This PS1 version is a Japanese exclusive port of the PC original, and since the PC original did come out in the West, this translation patch essentially takes the dub from that version and transfers it into the PS1 version, meaning the game is now finally playable from start to finish with the original voices present. Now, as far as point-and-click adventure games go, this game has everything you'd come to expect from the genre in the 90s, but for what it's worth, it's a pretty fun take on the genre and features some really fun minigames too that actually play much better than minigames in a point-and-click adventure game have any right to. Of course though, even with competent gameplay and mechanics, this is very much a game for Beavis and Butt-Head fans, and your enjoyment of it will really depend on how you feel about the animated show itself, because for the most part, this is a perfect recreation of the style, feel, and humor you would see from a classic episode of the series, just now in video game form. Having grown up with the original series back in the day, I couldn't help but play through this thing with a big smile on my face. It is really dumb, but hey, that's Beavis and Butthead for you. So if you're looking for a fun adventure game mixed with a lovely bit of 90s nostalgia, well, Beavis and Butthead on the PS1 is well worth checking out. Look, it's even got Daria. Everybody loves Daria. Oh yeah, it's chunky car time. Next up, we have Choro Q Wonderful, another entry in the much-loved CarPG series of role-playing racing games, and as of writing, this is the most recent fan translation to make its way to the console, having come out on Christmas Day, which will probably come as no surprise to those familiar with the Bible because, as we all know, Jesus is a big fan of the Choro Q series, so it's only right to release a new one on his birthday. Now, I've already covered some of the Choro Q games on this channel, both in the previous translation video and in review form too, but while the previous games had a primary focus on racing with a side helping of role-playing goodness, Choro Q Wonderful kind of flips things a bit, offering up a more full-on role-playing experience with the odd bit of racing. You'll spend more time in this one actually driving around cities and talking to other sentient vehicles and playing minigames than, actually doing the racing. Sure, there is racing, but, it's more important in this one to visit pizza shops and apply for visas. Now, while this is a fun take on a series that's already kind of unique as it is, I will say my first impressions of this one weren't as positive as the previous entries that I've played. Now, this probably comes down to the fact that my favorite thing to do in Choro Q games are to race and upgrade my car, and while you can do that here, they both take a backseat to just exploring the cities and playing minigames. Also, the soundtrack here is unfortunately nowhere near as good as the previous games, and a Choro Q game without a banging soundtrack is sacrilege really, I gotta say. It's probably something I'd need to spend a bit more time with to really appreciate, but for now I'd say this one is more for the Choro Q diehards. If it's your first time to the series, I'd recommend checking out any of the original Tamsoft trilogy on the console before you try this one, but either way, it is cool to see a weird series try be even weirder somehow. You gotta respect the hustle. Next up, we have the patch for Community Palm, courtesy of Lepemco Translations. Now, Community Palm is a game that I reviewed previously as part of my Japan-only PS1 games series, and truthfully, this is one of my favorite games that I discovered while working on these videos. A beautiful 2D top-down action RPG in the style of classic Zelda games, where you play as a little witch, but it's also got monster collecting and town-building elements too. Seriously. What's not to love? Really, my only major issue with the game was that the language barrier was getting in the way of understanding the story and some of the finer elements of the game's systems, but lo and behold, only a few months after I played that game, we've been gifted with a fan translation. What a time to be alive. And needless to say, actually knowing the story as well as the finer details of the monster and town building systems makes the game way more enjoyable. Who'd have thunk it? I also didn't expect the writing and story in this game to be as funny as it is too. I would have said in the past that the gameplay was probably enough to carry you through this one alone, but hey, having plotline motivation sure does help too. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to see my full thoughts on the original Japanese version, but needless to say, this is a very good game, and thanks to the translation patch, there has quite literally never been a better time to check it out. You know that feeling when you come across a game for the first time and you feel like it was almost made specifically to cater to your taste? Well, say hello to Gangway Monsters, a game made just for me. You see, growing up, I was a huge fan of all the popular animes at the time. Your Pokemons, your Digimons, Yu-Gi-Ohs, Beyblades, etc. And unfortunately for me, at least on the PS1 anyway, it just seemed like it was impossible to make a good Beyblade video game. Well, as it turns out, a little game called Gangway Monsters is in fact the best Beyblade game on the console. And not only is it a good Beyblade game, but it combines the monster collecting elements of Pokemon and Digimon to create a sort of mega hybrid of all my favorite childhood things. And it's actually a good video game. In this game, your monsters ride around on these little spin tops, and hitting into your opponent fills up a meter, which then allows you an opportunity to attack with your monsters to do damage. Each monster has its own abilities, and not only that, you can also level up your monsters and evolve them too to get even stronger abilities. There is of course a whole construction system for the spin tops themselves, allowing you to equip stronger and faster parts, which lets you outmaneuver your opponents in the arena, of which there are multiple different zones and styles. This is a game I could easily see myself getting addicted to. Sure, it's still got that old school feel, and its roster of monsters and spin top parts may not be that big by today's standards, but all the systems and features here work so well together, and it just feels like a great take on both monster collectors and spin top battlers. Although, unfortunately, you may have noticed that this is in fact the only game we'll look at today that has an incomplete translation. While this patch did only surface within the last year or so, work hasn't actually been done on it in over 2 years, and the translation that is here is all machine translated, meaning that you can get the gist of everything, but it's very messy and almost nonsensical at times. Thankfully, what's here is enough to allow you to play the game without too much hassle, but it is certainly a less than optimal experience. Although, funnily enough, after playing this patch, I learned that a demo for this game did actually appear on a North American PlayStation Underground disc. Something my PAL friends might not know is that American demo discs would often have import sections that let you check out Japanese games before they made it out into the West. Some of these games, of course, never did make it out to the West, but it's a really cool feature that I would have loved to have seen in our European demo discs as well. Well, as it happens, Gangway Monsters not only got a demo on one of these discs, but it also featured a partial official translation too. I guess the plan was to release this over in the West at some point, but alas, it was never meant to be. I'm really not sure why they didn't, to be honest. You know, this game would have been a cult classic for sure. I mean, look at it, Pokemon Beyblade. How could they deprive us of that? Up next, we have Goemon, the successor for a new generation. One of the more divisive games in the Goemon series, because instead of taking place in feudal Japan like most of the other games in the series, this one actually takes place in modern day Tokyo and is notably edgier and more anime in its style. But they did give Goemon a gun though. This is a pretty traditional Konami action platformer mixed in with the usual Goemon goodness, you know, visiting towns and buying items. The gameplay and action here is as tight as ever and revolves around swapping between your two playable characters to make use of their individual abilities to make it through each level. Honestly, the game itself feels great to play. It's about on par with what you'd expect from Konami games in the era, and since it's a Goemon game, the music here is also top notch too, giving us some supreme bangers, as is tradition. Now, I'll go on record saying I'm not hugely well versed in the Goemon series, but from what I can gather, the main issues people have with this game in particular is the graphical style, which, I mean, considering this is a rather late release on the console, it sure ain't the most appealing game you'll ever see visually. The characters and enemies look fine, but the environments just lack colour and, I don't know, personality. I can imagine if you think of Goemon in the future, well, you'd probably want something a bit more exciting than this. But for what it's worth, I still thought the gameplay here more than made up for the lacking visuals, and let me tell you, the gameplay, it's like the Czech Police. Tough but fair. Plus, we also have first-person 3D mech battles. I feel like that alone should probably give the game a pass, right? Also, the opening movie's a banger. Mech battles and a banger opening. Seriously, what more could you want? Hilltop, more like Can't Stop, giving us cool fan translations, because next we have Harmful Park, one of the more famous Japan-only exclusives on the console, because if you happen to own a copy, you likely also have enough to put down a deposit on a house. Now, this is another game that I covered previously on the channel. This gorgeous 2D shooter from Skythink Systems is one of the finest available on the platform, in my opinion. It's a fun roller coaster ride through an amusement park that's been taken over by evil, cuddly robots created by a mad scientist. And let me tell you, it's a trip from start to finish. Now, like most shmups, this isn't necessarily a game that requires a translation patch to be enjoyed by a non-Japanese speaker. Really, the only major thing that gets changed by this translation are the story segments, of which there isn't a huge amount overall, but for what it's worth, the game has a very funny and charming story that I would 100% recommend checking out with the patch version if you do plan on playing this game. It's as wacky as you'd expect from a game that lets you dodge tears from a dude left on the altar. I'll once again leave a link in the description to my full review if you'd like to know more, but suffice it to say, if you like shmups, especially those of the 2D horizontal cute up variety, well, Harmful Park is a no-brainer. Next up, we have Iblard Laputa no Kaeru Machi, a first-person adventure puzzler set in the magical world of Iblard, a fantasy land created by Japanese artist Nahisa Inoue, and also the setting for many of the creator's surreal and eye-catching works. Well, safe to say, a video game inspired by locations such as these would also be equally eye-catching and strange, and yes, that's most certainly what Iblard is. Now, it would be quite easy to dismiss this game as a sort of aesthetic PS1 game, a game where the primary reason for playing is to, well, experience and get lost in the world, and yes, while you can most certainly do that here, I was quite surprised by how much I enjoyed the moment-to-moment gameplay here too. The game begins by plopping you in a relatively small location where you need to solve a series of puzzles. You find a map, explore around a little, interact with various things, and by the time you've done and seen everything, well, you're on to your next little location to do it all over again. Nothing in this game is particularly challenging, but the locations, characters, and well, strangeness of it all always makes you want to push on to the next location. It even has a small bit of first-person shooter gameplay with you using boomerangs to take out smaller enemies, and you can even use everybody's favorite weapon, a magical broom. You love to see it. It's the perfect game to kind of just relax and get lost in. Go and see the sights and sounds, hang out with the weird dinosaurs, or make friends with a frog, you know? A game that's cool, surreal, and interesting, but also a lot of fun too. Definitely worth checking out. Here comes a game for the horror fans and also people who really like QuickTime events. It's Kowai Sashin Shinrei Sashin Kitan, a late release horror game on the console that is quite unlike anything I've ever played before. In this game, you play as an exorcist who lives alone in a big mansion. Our character here offers a service to others where she can exorcise the spirits that appear in photographs. So the game itself basically turns into this cool hidden object game where you scan people's photographs for strange anomalies, and then once you find them, you've got to exorcise them by playing a little QuickTime event minigame. And let me tell you, if you're not good at remembering where the PS1 face buttons are, well, after this game, you will be a pro. No doubt about it. Now, in terms of the horror factor, I guess how you'll feel about this game will really come down to how you feel about ghosts, spirits, and haunted photography. I personally didn't feel it was overly spooky, but it does have a nice atmosphere and is very different from other horror titles I'm used to playing, although the fact the game uses real locations and is said to be legitimately cursed as well might add some tension and realism to a playthrough. So if you see any weird light flickers or movements in your room while playing this thing, well, you might need an exorcism yourself, or you might just need to input a 10-button combination into your PS1 pad in under 3 seconds. Either option works, you know, whatever's good for you. Well, would you look at that, it's Namco Museum Encore. I didn't think I'd have to play another Namco game, let alone a Namco Museum game again for at least another year, but hey, here we are. So for those unaware, Namco Museum Encore is the 6th and final entry in the Namco Museum line of PS1 games, and also the only one to remain exclusive to Japan. Now, while this edition has arguably one of the strongest lineup of games available in the series, featuring heavy hitters like Rolling Thunder and Wonder Momo, unfortunately it also lacks the explorable museum of the 5 previous entries, which, let's be fair, are the real selling points of those games nowadays. Now, this is honestly another game you can probably get through fine without a translation, but the patch does translate all the scoreboard and receptionist dialogue, which ended up being quite handy actually, because it let me know I could change the menu backgrounds, which is kinda cool. But otherwise, the actual games themselves remain untouched, but hey, it's not like they needed much changing really. So if you want to play the complete Namco Museum collection on the PS1 in English, well, thanks to this fan patch, now you can. You never know, maybe the Namco Anthology games will see the patch treatment next. Ah, who am I kidding? No one cares about those. Next up, we have Planet Laika, which out of every game I've played today on this list is without a doubt the strangest and also one of the most fascinating games I've ever played on the console. This role-playing game is a collaboration between famed Japanese studio Quintet, known for the Soul Blazer trilogy of action RPGs, and a studio called Zek, who are probably best known for creating the game Kowloon's Gate. And if you're familiar with the works of both studios, you can probably tell you're in for a wild ride with this one. Planet Laika is such a bizarre game. Beyond its gorgeous visuals sporting a nice retro future aesthetic, the core gimmick here is that you play as a character named Laika who has multiple personality disorder, and after Laika and his crew of spacefaring friends partake in a mission to Mars, well, things end up going very, very poorly, mostly down to an evil aura that turns people insane, but a few other reasons too, which I won't delve into here. Also, Laika and his crew are anthropomorphic dogs. Yeah, it's pretty out there. So throughout this game, you'll explore Mars with Laika and make use of your multiple personality disorder, allowing Laika to transform into one of your 3 other personalities, each of which allows you to have different dialogue options with other characters, as well as solve various specific puzzles too. You can even partake in combat from time to time, although unlike traditional RPG combat, it's basically some bizarre version of Pong. I don't know, whatever it is, it seems on brand for the game really. I don't think I can recall playing through a game recently that's somehow so incredibly silly and funny, but also simultaneously kind of terrifying as well. Like, the best way I can describe this game is that the vibe is off. Everything here kind of feels like a bad trip, but in the best possible way. You never know where it's going to take you next, and every time you think you're getting some answers, you're really just going further down the rabbit hole. Easily one of the most interesting and unique games that I've ever played, and if you're a fan of the works of Quintet or Zek, then you need to go out of your way to check this one out. It's also low-key a Christmas game as well, so there you go. If you want to throw off the vibes next Christmas, well, now you know what to play. Moving on from one very unusual role-playing game to something a bit more traditional, here's PoPoLoCrois, a turn-based fantasy RPG based on the manga and anime of the same name. This is a game that, from the get-go, is a showstopper for fans of 2D visuals on the console. The game is played from an isometric viewpoint, not too unlike Super Mario RPG, and the environments and characters in particular just have so much personality in this game. Anytime a cutscene took place, I always had my eyes fixated on the characters to see what kind of expressions their faces would make, and there's just so many unique little details you can pick up on. It's really second to none. Also, there's a lot of cats to spot too, so, you know, keep your eyes peeled on those rooftops. On top of that, the battle system is also quite fun too. It goes for a sort of hybrid of traditional and tactical RPG, requiring you to position your characters in the battle arena to use certain moves. It's quite a lot of fun really, and something that no doubt allows for a bit of depth as the game goes on. This is quite simply a good-looking, light-hearted, and I don't know, pleasant role-playing game. The characters and dialogue are well written and engaging, and the experience as a whole feels like the pages of the manga being brought to life in cute JRPG form. The patch even adds some fan dubs to the game as well, and I know some people don't really like fan dubs in their patches, but I personally think they're a fun little addition to the game. Also, the little animation that shows your soul leaving your body whenever you die, now that's 10 out of 10 right there. Lovely stuff. Now there are a lot more games in this series, some exclusive to Japan and some not so exclusive to Japan, but we'll talk about them in just a moment, and by just a moment, I mean right now. Hey look, it's PoPoLoCrois 2. What are the odds? So this sequel is more or less a bigger and better version of the original, and ain't nothing wrong with more of a good thing. It's a direct follow-up to the original story-wise, and it now comes on a whopping 3 discs as opposed to the first game's 1, meaning there's now a ton of space to fit in a whole bunch of additional voice acting too. It even features some tweaks to the battle system, allowing for a more freeform style of movement, and of course, even more cats to spot. And the cats are now fatter than ever, which we love to see. Although one thing to highlight about this translation as opposed to the previous game is that while this game is fully playable, only the menu and story dialogue have been translated by the team. All the NPC dialogue, on the other hand, has been translated via machine translation, and as such, it's well, it's what you'd expect. Now, as mentioned, this won't prevent you from playing through the game, but one aspect I really liked about the original was the NPC dialogue, as almost every character in that game had something really funny or interesting to say, and Sadly, you do kind of miss it here in this version. Although, worry not, because both PoPoLoCrois 1 and 2 saw a Western release on the PSP. Well, kinda. You see, the PSP version isn't really a true representation of either game, rather it's a remix of both games combined into one singular experience, and as such, it means a ton of content is outright changed or missing from this version, hence why fans of the series still went to the effort of translating the PS1 originals, because if you want to enjoy these games in their original form, well, the PS1 is still the only place to do it. Now, that's not to say the PSP version is without merit, it's just, you know, some people really don't like having content changed or cut from their games, so for those people, this PSP version, well, that's no good. Either way, no matter how you choose to play it, PoPoLoCrois is a lovely little JRPG series, and one that is definitely worth checking out. Alrighty, we're back to some weird stuff, because it's time for RMJ the Mystery Hospital. Yeah. Question mark is silent, apparently. What we have here is an adventure game similar to classics like Myst, where you wander around a hospital using a mix of FMV and still images. Although what sets this game apart is how absolutely bonkers the characters and dialogue is in this game. It is wild, let me tell you. So long story short, a group of old friends have all ended up meeting again at a hospital thanks to a strange series of events, although there's no time for catching up, as our crew and a few other characters are now locked down within the hospital due to a viral outbreak. This is another game where the premise and gameplay kind of lends itself into the horror genre somewhat, but the way the characters talk and behave just never fail to make me crack up. The whole thing is so bizarre. As the game goes on, you'll begin to use psychic powers to interact with things, and the path you take in the game can actually change due to a character who loves flipping coins, and whatever that coin lands on actually changes the outcome of the game. Also, every now and then the game will oddly flash up the words "no fear" on the screen, which ironically ended up giving me a fright more times than I'd care to admit. Now, the gameplay itself, nothing to write home about really. It's more or less your standard 90s adventure game, but my god, is it easily one of the most batshit insane ones I have ever come across. So if you're in the mood for an adventure game that's a little off the wall, well then RMJ the Mystery Hospital is a trip well worth taking. So people who watched the previous fan translation video might be asking, hey Sean, didn't you already highlight Racing Lagoon last time? And the answer is yes. Yes, I did, but that was the prologue version of the patch prior to the full release, and now since we're far off into the future, the full version is out and available to all, and that's why we're going to look at it again. Also, it's Racing Lagoon, and any reason to talk about Racing Lagoon is a good one. So here we have easily one of the most anticipated and high-profile PS1 translations ever, which allows us to finally play Squaresoft's gorgeous high-stakes RPG from start to finish. Having finally spent some time playing the full version myself, well, it's as wacky and dramatic as one would hope, although I think it's the racing and car mechanics itself that really kind of caught me off guard. This thing is a pure Square RPG in so many ways, from the random battles on the map resulting in mini races, your experience and leveling system for your car parts, and even battles that both allow you and your opponents the opportunity to steal parts from vehicles depending on who's the winner. It's a very odd game, one that if you go into simply expecting a traditional racing experience, might leave some people feeling a bit cold towards it, but trust me, take the time to learn its quirks, grind some easy opponents, and take in those gorgeous Tokyo sights and sounds, and just get caught up in the drama of the plot. And well, what we have here is another odd and unique game on the console that could easily eat up hours of your life. Definitely check it out. Well, I suppose it's only fitting that we end today's video with a classic. It's the PS1 port of Shin Megami Tensei, that spooky devil RPG from Atlus that you might have heard about, you know, if you've got taste. Now, while the original SMT wasn't the first Megaten game to come from Atlus, this is the one that arguably put the series and Atlus as a whole on the map. Well, at least in its home country of Japan anyway. It's a role-playing game with a focus on first-person dungeon crawling and monster collecting, and if you played any of the more recent entries or the Persona series, well, this formula should all sound quite familiar to you. Now, this most certainly isn't the first version of SMT to receive an English translation, with both the Super Famicom and Game Boy Advance versions both receiving fan patches in the past. Now, there's a lot of debate over which version of the game is the definitive version. Some people prefer the Super Famicom visuals and music to the PlayStation's enhanced CD sound and 3D dungeons, and well, the GBA version is kind of like a strange amalgamation of the two. The short answer is that it really comes down to personal preference, but no matter which version of the game you opt to play, you'll be in for a treat because this is a genre-defining role-playing game full of dark and adult themes, challenging gameplay, and since it's an SMT game, a banging soundtrack, as is tradition. So if you never got around to playing the game that made Atlus the studio it is today, well, this is yet another fine way to do so, and if you're still yet to play an SMT game at all, well, seriously, come on, what are you doing with your life? Probably spending it outside with your family, I imagine. Oh well, more hee-ho for me. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That's another 18 fan translations that made it to the PS1, a collection of traditional gaming experiences and not so traditional gaming experiences that once again go to show how interesting and diverse the original PlayStation's library is. Whether it's Pokemon Beyblade, grim roguelike dungeon explorers, or a canine split personality space mysteries, well, I think it's safe to say the console is still offering up surprises all these years later. So clearly 2022 has been a great year for fan translations across the board, and we'll be lucky if 2023 brings us even half as many great games. And you can bet if folks are still happy to make them, well then I'll be happy to do another video on them this time next year. Actually, one thing I'd really recommend checking out as well, if you get the chance, is this video Hilltop made about the process required to actually bring these translations to us. There is an incredible amount of work and technical know-how required for this stuff, and it's fascinating to watch whether you're somebody interested in the techniques used, or if you just simply want to know more about the challenges faced by the people doing this for us. It'll give you a much greater understanding and appreciation for the people and teams behind these patches, and if anything, watching this makes the fact that we got so many great patches this year seem like a minor miracle, to be honest. So I'll of course leave a link to that video in the description. Now, as always, before we finish up, I'd like to ask you at home what games you'd like to see receive the fan translation treatment next year. I personally can think of about maybe a dozen or so off the top of my head, but my new number one pick would be the game Germs, just so I could wander around this low poly open world and not get lost and confused every 5 minutes. That would be nice. And of course, I gotta give one final 2022 shout out to my lovely Patreons for helping to support the work I do here on YouTube, including fine folks like Lad, Alan Caslin, Crimson Cyclist, Dave Nolan, Doma, Fergal O'Hagan, Globe99, Kyle Winter, Moomatron, Moomin Biscuit, Trans Rights Are Human Rights, Mr. the Joshmon, Richard Kramer, and Spectre117, who have all subscribed at the Fan++ tier. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you at home for watching this video. I'll be taking a little break from the videos early in the new year, but you can rest assured I'll be back in 2023 for plenty more nostalgic PS1 goodness. So until then, I'm gonna love yous and leave yous. Take it easy, be kind to one another. I look forward to talking to you again next year. See ya!